We're actually finishing that book now. It started around the same time as this 10 years ago, and it's just KK's
All right,
archive.
so that one's called Slash.
Yeah, Slash, a punk magazine from Los Angeles, 1977 to 1980. The Velvet Underground book we did, which is called Experience, was I was in Paris. I saw this Velvet Underground exhibition. I bought the book. It was in French. I was like, this is the greatest book about the Velvet Underground. Why isn't it in English? So we bought the rights. Luckily, the curators were bringing the exhibition to the States. Unfortunately, COVID cut it off from being able to hit multiple cities, but we ended up producing the book for that show. You know, that to me, you know, was, you know, because that's one of my favorite bands. And we were able to do at the same time, and they came out together. So we were selling them as a bundle. My Week Beats Your Year, which is the Encounters with Lou Reed book, which is the solo years, 1972 till his death in 2013.
That one looks really cool.
Which is basically a book of Lou Reed being a dick to music journalists, which became kind of an art form at a certain point. You know, and I remember, again, YouTube being a great sort of synthesis with the book itself is you can go through that book and go and find the interview from 1974 in Australia where he's just like completely being a dick to some journalist.
It's almost like a landing page.
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, where he's just, obviously Lou Reed's fucked out of his mind on drugs during a lot of the 70s, so he just ends up being, you know, just kind of like, you know, an interviewer's nightmare. But I think like Hunter Thompson, he knew that at a certain point he was playing a persona.
And he's keeping himself in the news.
Yeah,
which is kind of a thing that everybody does now. Just say something disturbing and, you know, you'd be in the news every single day.
I mean, when we ended up doing the Lou Reed cover of Stop Smiling, once you got past the veneer of the sort of too cool for school Lou Reed, he did kind of become a sweetheart. Like after we did that issue, he was one of the covers. When I would run into him on the street in New York, you know, I don't know if he remembered my name, but he sort of remembered who I was and was like, "Hey man, what's up?" And wasn't this person with the walls up.
I mean, by that point, he was married to Laurie Anderson and a completely different person.
Yes, I think the Laurie Anderson years really mellowed him the fuck out. You know,
and by the way, she finished the book he was writing.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the Velvet's book wouldn't have happened without Laurie's permission because she let us run all this stuff from the archive, pictures of him when he was a kid. Same John Cale as well. You know, one of the things I'm hoping to do with John Cale before he's checks out is, and I guess this would go the same for Eno, is to do a visual book of not just his records, but all the records that John Cale produced.
Yeah.
Which in the 70s are
a lot of people don't know about that side of him.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the Stooges, the Modern Lovers, like Horses by Patti Smith. Like, I mean, it's some of the greatest records of the 70s.
A prolific guy.
If it wasn't for John Cale, I don't know if those records would be as good. I mean, I guess Todd Rundgren as well, you know, who was in Nas and then had his own kind of solo thing, but was, you know, became this kind of record producer. Of course, Brian Eno did all those Talking Heads and U2 records that like probably wouldn't have been as good if Brian Eno wasn't behind the boards.
Most people don't even know that he did one of the biggest Coldplay albums. Viva La Vida.
Yes, I didn't realize that.
It's an incredible album and not like anything else they did before or since.
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap up, like, I guess some of the 5 favorite books.
Tell me, though.
The Pulp book for sure has become the gold standard in that all the band
What's the title of the Pulp book?
It's called I'm With Pulp, Are You?
I'm With Pulp, Are You? Wow.
So that has, on the cover is the sticker from the 90s, and that's where we got the title of the book. But then the other amazing part is for the limited edition swag for the paperback, we've reproduced that sticker.
What's the significance of the sticker?
It was like Pulp was like they were really big into merchandising at the time where there was like a paperback book called Pulp that looked like a pulp novel from the 50s. You know, that phrase, like, I'm with Pulp, are you? You know, they were drawing a line in the sand and saying, we're on this side, other people are on this side. I don't know the exact origin of that title, but Mark thought it was a great title for the book because it's sort of like, it encapsulates sort of the ethos that, you know, these guys were all kind of, you know, working class or middle class people from Sheffield who became rock stars. And that just didn't really happen again after the 60s. Obviously, there was the 60s British invasion, and a lot of those bands, including the Rolling Stones and Beatles, came from really modest beginnings and then became these larger-than-life figures. And then that kind of went away because of the excesses of rock and roll. And then in the 90s, again, it kind of became a thing where you could kind of come out of nowhere and this is no disrespect to Damon Albarn or Blur, but his dad was a famous record designer in the 60s and grew up in posh kind of London. And a lot of these bands, the reason they could even be in a band was because they didn't have to have jobs and they got a free ride to college and they had something little nest egg to sit back on. There was something really utilitarian about Pulp that I think I really identified with. I mean, that record, His and Hers and Different Class, were really just sort of about we're the weird outsiders and you guys are the sort of mainstream posh people who maybe are slumming it as bohemians now, but will eventually conform and become, the sort of mainstream, people that everyone is afraid that they're going to turn into their parents and move to the suburbs and just kind of phone it in and stop caring about art and music and things like that. I was really drawn to that. And also the lyrics of all the songs. I mean, Jarvis is sort of, he was poking fun at the class system, and their most famous song, Common People, is basically the song is basically about how delusional rich people are and how that song is about a girl who's studying sculpture at St. Martin's Art College, and she wants to hang out with normal people. So she pretends that she's poor and moves into a apartment where there's roaches on climbing the walls. I mean, this is all in the theaters. There's a line in the song where it's there's nothing to do but drink and screw because all that's what rich people do. It's kind of the folly. It's a Gatsby type of thing, you know? And obviously the British class system is a lot more entrenched than what we have here. So there is more of that sort of dividing line between that. I mean, nowadays it's, London's become so hyper expensive that, I don't think any bands could really eke out some sort of existence there now. A lot of them are coming from the second cities because they have no choice but to, even my friends who are musicians there that are younger than me, 10 or 15 years, to even continue to do music, they've had to sort of move out of London and live somewhere else in order to maintain some sort of existence and raise their kids and still also
That's why my wife and I moved to Palmdale. It's just LA is so expensive now. I don't mind working here and being here, but
where were you guys living previous to that?
We lived on Las Palmas, right in the middle of Hollywood, and then we lived in Mid-City for a while. But if we were going to buy a house and leave something for our kids, that definitely, the house we bought in Palmdale would probably be $3 million here.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's so funny, too. I think Palmdale was on its way to... And Lancaster, too, at a certain point, because they did build an airport out there, but they were at one point going to build a huge airport out there that was going to rival LAX. And I think what ended up happening was they didn't build the transportation by train there.
Well, that's the thing, this new administration, we were going to have a high-speed train all ready for the Olympics in 2028. And for me, I could hop on that and be to Burbank in 15 minutes. But as soon as the new administration moved in, that was shut down.
Yeah,
there's no reason why our country shouldn't be technologically as advanced as much as, I mean, look at you've got in France, they've had the TGV forever.
Yeah, and the bullet trains in Japan.
Yeah.
I think the politicians of both political parties have brainwashed the public into thinking that we're the greatest nation on earth, when if you spend any time elsewhere, you see how much the better quality of life is for almost virtually everybody. Anywhere in Europe, anywhere in the UK, you could almost make the argument that it's better than living here because you do have the universal health care, which for all its flaws has been one of the reasons why, I've had a pre-existing condition. I have a chronic illness. I've had it since I was a kid. I've learned to live with it, but I've also been discriminated against for years because even before Obamacare, they would insure me, but they would charge me 5 times as much. Then for years, they wouldn't insure me because I had a so-called pre-existing condition. So I'd always have to have some sort of day job working. That's why I worked at Barnes & Noble. I kept the insurance by working there 2 days a week. Back in the 90s, they still kind of offered that at big companies. They probably would never do that now. It'd be too cost prohibitive for them to afford to keep the people on the rolls.
But the problem with this is people like you and me, we love Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's so diverse. There's so much artistic quality here. I just really hope that it can turn around.
I mean, it's moving back to like what it was like before mass production after World War II and the sort of ascension of the middle class that everyone talks about being like the great era of America. And that is what allowed us to become the world power that we are. We've kind of, and this also led to Trumpism because look, no millennials or Gen Z can really afford to buy property without rich parents. None of them have like even illusions that they'll even be able to do it in their lifetime.
A lot of the
anymore.
younger generation, they don't drive, they don't own cars, and they're forced to move back into their parents because they can't afford to live.
And what are we saying about society where we're only going to reward people who've gone into a couple of lines of work that maybe people find repulsive? I don't have any desire. I'm not like a computer scientist. If I were, I'd be a coder. But everything can't just be about one or two industries that are unregulated and rooted in corporate greed, which I'm sorry to say, but Silicon Valley and Wall Street are 100% rooted in corporate greed. This tax cut, which is from a week ago, the largest wealth transfer in American history from the poor to the rich, I think the biggest fraud in our lifetime has been this idea of trickle-down economics, that if you give rich people tax cuts, they're going to use that money to hire more employees, to start a new company. And this sort of nomenclature that's used like, oh, the risk takers, the job creators. I'm a job creator. I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to make these books and pay freelancers to put them all together.
And you're trying to help other artists survive as well.
And even I'm like at the point where after what happened when Trump got in the wildfires, no one bought anything for 6 months. I lost all of my lines of credit with all the printers because I wasn't able to pay them off in time.
Right.
And I'm slowly rebuilding, but I don't have 5 more years to not get paid properly to rebuild this company a second time after COVID destroyed it. So now I'm going to put out a third as much stuff, maybe half as much stuff. And it's not because I don't want to put out more stuff. It's just that the financial risk is too much. Yeah. The cost of making this stuff, the shipping's at least 40% more than it was before COVID. The actual manufacturing, 20, 30% more. It's never going to go down. So this idea that people want things for less money when making them cost more and more, there's a disconnect between the public and not realizing that stuff.
Right.
And then, the idea that large corporations, which at one point would have been shocked into not doing stuff in China, now it's just like, like the big publishers, almost all the shit's made in China. The Getty, the biggest endowment of art probably in the country, most of the stuff's made in China. It's not that there aren't good printers in China. China is cheating by making their stuff precipitously lower cost than it ever would be in reality if you paid people a living wage. And they're subsidizing it through their quasi-fake communist capitalist government. It's a recipe for disaster. Yes, people want cheap goods, but if the real price of something is not reflected in how things are manufactured, it's like there's that famous Minutemen album, 3-way tie for last place. Like, I feel like all industries have completely checked out morally for the last 25 years. And it's like the fact that Disney makes all their stuff in China is, to me, insane. This is one of these big emblematic American companies that's supposedly, oozes Americana. There's no way we would have won the Cold War if we had manufactured stuff in countries behind the Soviet bloc. It just would not have worked because we would have funded their tyrannical governments to clamp down on power and to manipulate the economy, which is exactly what China and Vietnam and every country that doesn't have freedom is doing. And yet there's no moral compunction or there's no punishment for doing this. I mean, it's clearly destroyed all the manufacturing jobs in this country. Someone asked me the other day, this is sort of a good way to sort of bring it back to full circle. Do you think the printing, based on what Trump's doing with the tariffs, could America come back and be able to allow publishers to print the majority of the stuff here again? And I don't think that's possible because there aren't enough small businesses that could support it. When you have everything consolidated where 4 or 5 companies control all book publishing, all movies, all magazines, everything.
All music,
it's just not going to happen. What made manufacturing work on a regional level throughout most of the 20th century was there would be a regional soul album in Columbus, Ohio that would print up the records in a manufacturing plant that was in Toledo, and they were based in Cleveland. And there was this hyper locality to it, which allowed the company to do it, but also to save money by not having to ship it from halfway around the fucking world.
Yeah.
Just so that you could get to the price point to what you want it to be. One kind of happy ending in this is the Czech Republic, which of course was part of Yugoslavia during the Soviet Union, I think is the number one manufacturer of all vinyl now in America. There's a company called A to Z Consolidated that is, kind of a wholesaler, but most of the record labels I know work with them to make the records in Europe now. And it's not because there's not still manufacturers of vinyl in the US. It's that there's so few left that when Adele has a new record out or Taylor Swift has a new record out, they're blocked and clogged up for so long that you can't make records. I mean, at one point, I think this was during the height of COVID, my friends who make records said that it was like a 9 to 12 month lead time to make a record. So you had to release this thing to get made a year before you'd ever have it in hand. And sometimes there's an insane disconnect with just that level of time. We generally will announce something and within 3 to 4 months we have it in hand.
Right.
And we'll pay extra to airmail in some pre-sale copies while we wait for the stuff to come on the slow boat, which is the only affordable option. And we found little tricks that aren't maybe the most financially viable, but that start the hype machine. So with the Pulp book, when they toured last summer, we airmailed in a couple of hundred, and then suddenly those showed up at all the shows, and then everyone started taking pictures of it, and then it started to show up online, and they're like, oh, there's this book, and then people would find their way to our website and then read the text and say, oh, if I pre-order it now, I'll be able to get a first edition.
Yeah.
A lot of the record labels I am friends with, they tell me now that with regards to the physical vinyl, that they'll announce a reissue or a record, and they'll wait and see what the response of the pre-sales is before they determine how many they make, versus making, say, 5,000 copies because you got a certain per unit cost that made sense for your budget. That's no longer the way to do things because there's not enough physical record stores. There's not the Borders and the Barnes & Noble buying in en masse the way they were in the 90s. So it's almost like the pre-sales of books and records almost determine what the fan base is for that record or book. I mean, I don't know if we ended up getting around to it this morning, but there's a video that we took of the paperback of the Pulp book, which we just shrunk down.
Right.
And so I have the band's handle posting about it. I have Mark, the author from the bands, posting about it. And then we post about it. And there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do a collaboration post where all three algorithms get this announcement, or you just all cut and paste the same images and text and all posted, within the same hour or something.
Yeah.
And so we may have to, because it's too late today to probably do it because it's night in England. We'll wait till tomorrow to do it. But that in a way determines now how many copies of the first printing we do, because the kiss of death with physical product is warehousing it and moving it around once you've made it. And I think that's what's really made records very difficult and that's why records, for instance, have been non-returnable since 2001. If there's a ding in the corner, you're not going to pay $30 for a new record. Yeah. Somehow books have just, because of the corporate, distribution model, which, Ingram makes money whether they sell the books or not, because they're charging you for the storage. They're charging you for the return fee. I mean, I felt so liberated to have left from that because it was so demoralizing to make these books. We'd give them half the print run and we'd have to sell the other half ourselves just so we wouldn't lose our pants. But yet the whole time we were doing it, the entire public had no idea we were fighting this battle. And so by cutting them out entirely, now we only sell to indie stores that will buy from us directly. And if they don't, fuck them.
Right.
If their whole model only works if you get loosey-goosey terms from Christian nationalist psychopaths that run a monopoly that has destroyed the publishing industry and more than I think Amazon has. I mean, there's a thing called bookshop.org that a friend of mine launched a few years ago. In theory, it's a great idea. It's an alternative to Amazon. It sounds like it's a nonprofit because it has a .org address. It's not. But the fatal flaw is that it's fulfilled by this distributor. So yes, you're not using Amazon.
Right.
But the company fulfilling your bookshop.org order is the company most responsible for Amazon destroying the entire marketplace.
Wow.
So you're emboldening them to destroy it more by virtue signaling that you didn't buy it on Amazon, when in reality the cuts going to the publisher are even worse, because their whole virtue signal with bookshop.org is 2 or 3% goes to independent booksellers. That sounds great until you know what the actual margins are.
Right.
The booksellers, it used to be in the 90s, the bookseller got 40%, the publisher got 40%, the wholesaler took 20%. Amazon moved it to the point where the stores now get 50%, free shipping, 120 days to pay, return anything. And then the wholesaler is now taking close to 30%. So there's no fairness at all. It wasn't even fair when it was 40, 40, 20, but it was fair enough where those margins were doable.
Could still make it work, yeah.
And that's what's happened with vinyl. Like, vinyl would not exist if the record labels, I think, are still getting around 35%.
Right.
And again, not a lot to write home about, but not a loss leader. I mean, I heard the new Cure record sold crazy on vinyl. And it's really good. It's kind of like their best record in decades. Yeah, I don't see a solution out of this except other people finding access to money and starting things like what we've done. And it's going to be harder for people nowadays, because I can see it even in my friends who still work in the record business, where if they didn't have the 90s back catalog, would what they're doing now even exist?
That's a great argument.
Because like that stuff, some of those records and some of those bands, John Setzer Blues Explosion, Pavement, Liz Fair, those are rite of passage bands. So when you find out about them, a whole new generation is going to find out about Minor Threat and go buy a Minor Threat record.
Right.
Not that there aren't artists selling lots of records now, but it's not in the same quantities as back then, because obviously most people are streaming them. And so there just isn't enough trickling down. And someone said to me the other day, like, one of my record label friends, said, look, at this point, whatever goes to retail, it's just marketing for us.
Right.
Like, the only way we make any money is if the bands buy them from us and sell them on tour and we get our full 50%, or we sell it direct and we have no cuts.
Right.
And, if you look at Light in the Attic, like, which used to do tons of reissues, they're doing like maybe 1 or 2 a year now. And that's because the music industry has moved into licensing and syncs, and that's kind of where all the money is left. Numero Group, which also does a lot of reissues, and they are doing a lot of physical product and a lot of box sets still, God bless them. They're owned by Secretly Canadian, which is a consortium of a bunch of indie labels that not only have all these indie labels working together, but also their own distribution model. Right. And I grew up with those guys. They're in Bloomington, Indiana, and I have known them since the 90s. And I think what they've done is absolutely remarkable. And they've really changed the industry for the better. And they're able to break big artists. I mean, especially it's kind of crazy because it did start as sort of a boys club, but a lot of the Secretly bands are, like Sharon Van Etten and Angel Olsen and Phoebe Bridgers, and even the Yeah Yeah Yeahs are now in Secretly Canadian. They have a female singer. These artists blew up on indie labels, you know? They may have gotten a commercial or a licensing or sync deal for something, but they've been able to sort of make it. Whereas, when you and I were growing up, there was this ascension where like the indie labels were the farm team. Right. You would do a couple records and then you would have to go to the
college
major
radio.
Yeah, because otherwise, the bands would never get enough money to like really record a record or get in advance to like buy new equipment or whatever. Now the major labels almost seem like a hindrance, and most of my friends who are musicians are either working with indies again or releasing the records themselves because they realize
they don't want to have to pay their advance back.
Right, and they realize them selling 1,000 direct is the same as the label maybe selling 10,000. Right, and because the cuts are so nuts, and whatever the royalty rate was never sort of substantial enough that it ever made any sense.
I think that's a good title for this interview. The cuts are nuts.
The cuts are nuts. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you have to be doing this as a labor of love because it makes no financial sense whatsoever. I mean, what worries me is I talk at a lot of schools, and I used to a lot more when I taught college. I don't have any fancy degrees, and that's kind of one of the reasons I don't work in academia is the same thing we were talking about earlier with you having to get these kind of certifications to even teach music. It's even worse in like teaching college level where unless you have a PhD or some fancy master's degree that costs a shitload of money, even someone as accomplished as me, I mean, I do circles around 90% of the people that teach at these schools.
Right.
And I have way more real life experience, but that doesn't matter anymore. We've created this kind of like caste system where only people of a certain pedigree can really even get to the point where they get those advanced degrees because
Even if we had those degrees, how are we going to pay them off?
yeah. Well, PhD programs are funded, but what they don't tell you is that who could live in a major city like Los Angeles on $23,000 a year or whatever pitiful amount of money you're supposed to do. So
Any teacher out there, yeah.
So then that relegates the people who do these PhD programs to people who don't have to work,
Right.
so they can be an academic or they can live in academia and live off this, sort of terribly unrealistic stipend for the 7 years they're doing their advanced degree.
Yeah.
And if they didn't have this sort of other money, I noticed it too. Like I realized how much of like an outlier I was when I started running around in New York in the late 90s, early aughts when stop smiling. Like I was like the only person in my group of friends that didn't go to an Ivy League school, that didn't come from, some sort of pedigree that would put me in this echelon of people that were part of the the literati of New York. And you see it now more than ever. Like you can't live on $80,000 a year working at the New Yorker and live in Manhattan. You would have to have, someone in your family that could help you subsidize your costs of living to be able to do that type of job.
Most of the teachers I know out here are making like 50 to 60. That is not enough to get by in Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
And then they're all like me where they've got to do 3 other jobs when they're done into the night. And then you get home, you have 2 hours and you fall asleep and then you do it again.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I want to open this space, as difficult as it probably will be, and having to raise the money for something like this in a kind of a year like this year with the fires and Trump. But I think I don't see this having a happy ending unless we can sell other people's books and have all these other revenue streams, because just making cool books doesn't cut it enough. It doesn't matter how many you sell. The cuts are nuts. To go back to that. And like, at least in Europe and the UK, there's some semblance of reason. So we're lucky in that we can at least make stuff that generally does sell well here and there. Whereas most American publishers, they only have the North American rights.
Yeah.
And then they go to the book fairs in Europe and the UK and they sell those rights. And then these books are published in foreign languages. One thing that is encouraging is that enough people speak English now and we have sold the foreign rights to certain books to be translated, but we can sell an English language edition of virtually all these books anywhere.
Right.
Enough people speak English now where maybe they can't read the whole book, but they're still going to buy it for the images and maybe they just read the captions or something.
Hey, there's apps now. You can just hold your phone over the page.
Yeah. And so that is one thing that is kind of encouraging. But, one of my UK friends who was in town 2 weeks ago, and we're planning the second location in London, this kind of bookstore, gallery space combo, community space. He said, isn't it depressing that, basically the U.S. is now window dressing for anything. If you make any physical product, you basically you've checked out from being able to make any money in this country, a huge country with the 3rd largest population on earth. And you have to make money in these other countries in order to be able to even exist in this country. When I worked at Taschen and Phaidon about 15, 20 years ago, I guess, 12, 15 years ago, I remember realizing at the time, now Taschen is based in Germany, and at the time Phaidon was based in London. They're now based in New York. There's a new owner. But I remember when I was talking with my European counterparts at the time, they would be like, oh, yeah, we don't really make any money in the U.S. because the whole marketplace is rigged against publishers and there's no way to make money.
Right.
So we make money in like Europe and Asia where there's a fixed marketplace that actually like protects the indie bookstores and the publishers from this corporate greed. And we just use the U.S. as kind of like
advertising,
window dressing.
Yeah.
But how sad is it that a country this great and this big is basically just like, window dressing. I mean, there's no other publishers that have done what we have done that haven't had, extreme wealth in the family of someone who founded it to be able to even do it.
Right.
So that in and of itself gets me, into, a death spiral sometimes of being depressed because I don't have someone to call to get access. I'm sitting on maybe 30 or 40 finished books right now. The way we've created our system to work after 2008, unless you have 4 times the collateral of what you're trying to borrow,
Right.
no bank will give you any money to grow your business. So your only option is to raise money through the private market, which means going to those 3 groups of people: inherited wealth, tech, and Wall Street.
I hope you enjoy listening to part 5 of The Cuts Are Nuts, featuring my good friend J.C. Gabel, talking about everything under the sun, including his book publishing company, Hat and Beard Press. While you are waiting for part 6, I would love you to go to hatandbeard.com and check out my favorite book of the day that they've published. This one is called The Black Chord, with photographs by David Corio and text by Vivian Goldman. This book features beautiful photos of Afro-American singer-songwriters and musicians. I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction, and I think you'll get a clear idea of what this book is all about. The original rhythms of music we hear on the radio in America and Europe today came up from the Caribbean and Africa. Those are the roots. The grooves took on different vibrations in different locations, and you can still hear them now in hip-hop and R&B. When I had the opportunity to go to Africa and visit the villages, I heard the real, raw, true rhythms and realized the origins of the music that I was raised on. It reminded me of who I was and where I came from, and that I owe it to myself to pursue my history. We should all take lessons and understand the whole odyssey of music coming from Africa to where it is today, so that we can have a deeper appreciation of how music came to be where it is. This book is truly amazing and features photos of all kinds of artists who have inspired me over the years, including Thelonious Monk, Fela Kuti, Prince, Johnny Guitar Watson, Aretha Franklin, Sade, Tina Turner, John Lee Hooker, and Marvin Gaye. If you really dig music like I do, I hope you will take a second to check out The Black Chord by David Corio. Tune in next time for part 6, the final episode of The Cuts Are Nuts, with my good friend J.C. Gabel. Thanks for listening. Over, under, out.
The Cuts Are Nuts.